if we build a cyber stack correctly from the ground up, breaches become something which is a far more distant conversation because we're adding in that proactive element right from the ground up.
Welcome to the Cybersecurity Defenders Podcast, where we talk to the people who keep the internet safe. These industry experts share their innovative cyber defense technologies, vital insights into threats, and predictions for the future of cybersecurity. My name is Christopher Luft. I'm one of the co-founders of LimaCharlie, and I will be your host. This podcast is brought to you by LimaCharlie, maker of the SecOps Cloud platform, infrastructure for SecOps where everything is built API first. Scale with confidence as your business grows. Start today for free at limacharlie.io. Now let's get into it. Thanks for coming on the show today, Hannah.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Christopher. I'm very much looking forward to it.
Before we get into it, do you maybe want to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what you do?
Yeah, of course. So I'm Hannah Lloyd. I'm the Chief Revenue Officer of Enhanced.io. We are a channel-specific vendor that works with MSPs and MSSPs all over the world to deliver SOC as a service. Ranging from SIEM, SOC, vulnerability management. I also do a lot of work with GTIA as well. I'm the Chair Emeritus of the UK&I Executive Council. So I also work with a lot of different MSPs in the ecosystem on more of a mentoring basis as well. So got a broad breadth of different discussions that always happen in the cybersecurity space.
Very cool. And I know we touched on this a little when we spoke before the recording. You didn't exactly have a clear path into cybersecurity. Do you want to maybe talk about how you came to a career in cybersecurity?
Yeah, it's always that's always a fun one because people always ask me, so was it always your dream to end up in tech? And yes, now I would say that it's very much what I love and it's a passion of mine. But I originally did a degree in English literature, as every British person seems to do, that or history. And when I was finishing my degree, I got a phone call from a recruitment agency asking if I would be interested in doing sales in the short term at that point. And I thought, I want money. You know, every graduate is a case of I need some money to be able to at least fund a car or something. So I went along to the selection interview and I then got offered the job with my now business partners at their previous business, which was going from an MSP into a channel vendor working with other MSPs to deliver knock and service desk. So I started off as an inside sales rep, didn't know what a server was, thought a pizza box was something which would only happen on a Friday. And so had many an embarrassing discussion with the engineers that were in the room. And continuously block the printer as well. But then as we started to evolve, the channel started to evolve very quickly all of a sudden in around 2016 to 2017. The conversation was shifting out of specifically IT around MSPs into more how do we incorporate cybersecurity into the ecosystem effectively. And so in 2019, we split out and my business partners and myself formed a cybersecurity company, which was originally called InSoc. And we also had Redcore, which was a staffing business. Originally separate at the time because the conversations were very, very different with different MSPs. And then the cybersecurity piece built up from there. And my business partners have a technical background, graphics background, all of that type of stuff. And we then merged the two companies last year because the types of MSPs we were dealing with were looking for a combination of that skill set plus tools plus policy and so forth. So we're now here with very much a comprehensive solution that originally started off as something which was two separate pieces, standalone, and now we're having more of that conversation as being part of a stack rather than a standalone option, which it previously was 6 years ago. So looking back 11 years ago when I started in IT, it's, when I speak out loud, it's a journey which looks completely unrecognizable. Every single year something changes, and so it's cyber wasn't even in the original plan probably within my first 2 years. It was a completely different unknown at that point.
Oh, I love that. I've interviewed probably over 100 people on this show so far, and I don't think I've had two of the same answers about how people found their way into cybersecurity, because it has evolved during people's careers. You know, you go back to the late 90s and it wasn't even called cybersecurity. It was still sort of like Q, quality assurance, or the help desk, right?
Very much so.
And you've spent your career doing something I think a lot of our listeners will be very interested in, and that is helping MSPs turn cybersecurity into revenue. That's definitely a hard thing that a lot of our MSSPs and MSPs listeners struggle with. What drew you into that, and what is it about the go-to-market strategy here that keeps you going?
I think that's a really, really good question. And I will be completely candid with the answer. When we first started, and I think that the conversation is, you just said, Christopher, where cyber never used to be called cyber. It then was, as I said, it used to be a standalone offering outside of the IT skill set. It then evolved into something that MSPs knew that they had to offer. We then had COVID, which then changed the game again. And in the very early days of Enhanced back then in SOC, it was a very different landscape. We were in a situation where MSPs, so we offer a Open XDR SIEM tool. It's a big, heavy duty beast of a tool set. It's enterprise grade, absolutely fantastic tool set, and it continuously evolves. That's brilliant, apart from the fact back then, what do we as an MSP do with that? Do I need it? Do my clients need it? My clients have no force behind them to need that. I can provide them antivirus. I don't even need EDR at this point. So the conversation, and whenever you have very technical people in the room within your own team, I couldn't do my job without my CISSPs. They make me look far brighter than I am. However, the big conversation at that point was all of the bells and whistles of a SIEM tool. What makes this SIEM do more than a log monitoring SIEM? And that's a conversation that needed to be had. But ultimately, the end client doesn't care. They don't care about all of that stuff. And to this day, they do care that bit more, but ultimately, what's the business objective here? And any salesperson and any CRO, any inside sales rep on here that would be listening to this podcast, ultimately is being taught solution sales are the way forward. And it's not about features and benefits anymore. We can't just be listing out all of the things that something can do. It's about the end result of a discussion. It's about the end result of a solution. It's not about just a tool anymore. And the channel, especially at the moment, every conversation I have with MSPs, and it doesn't matter how big they are or whether they are at the beginning of an MSSP journey, perhaps turning from consultant into more of a managed security service, much like we went from ad hoc IT into a managed service, are having the same problem in the fact that it's that shiny tool syndrome. There's another software out there. There's another SaaS product. Oh, there's another this, that, and the next thing. But when we bring that in, and essentially MSPs and MSSPs are a business and they need to monetize. But cybersecurity is a very interesting conversation in the fact that we don't want to be seen as ambulance chasing. We don't want to be seen as ethically. It's not just actually about not wanting to be seen. There's an ethical conversation there as to, should you be looking to profiteer? At the end of the day, security should be monetized. But it's how we go about that with the end client. The end client in this situation doesn't want to feel like you're selling them something to make money, a new software just because it's going to make you money. So it's about building a solution that has a business requirement within an end client that keeps them safe from their insurance company, keeps them safe from regulatory compliance, all of that type of stuff, so that there's an ethical conversation which allows the MSP to monetize with that trust aspect. So it's a very complicated evolution, but ultimately it's moving out of, we know as technical people, IT people, security people, that we want a tool set that does everything in the kitchen sink. That's probably a Britishism, but everything and in between. We want that. Our engineers want that. They can do amazing things with it. But we also all know the conversation with an engineer that's gone above and beyond, but we haven't charged for it, or that they've done all these fantastic things and the end client doesn't even know they've done all those fantastic things. So it's adding that business element to it, which also allows you to be ethical. It allows you to be able to have a thought leadership conversation, not one which is specific to a direct profit margin, if that makes sense.
100%. Yeah, and I think that's the right way to go about things for sure. You did mention insurance and compliance there. And I'm curious because at RSA this year, I saw so many compliance or compliance adjacent companies sort of pop up that didn't seem to be there last year. And, the rise of Anta and all these giant companies dealing with it. How much of the new business in cybersecurity and the interest from MSPs getting into cybersecurity is driven by like new compliance regulations and insurance?
That's a really interesting question. And I would say, no matter from when we started to now, in the last 5 years, I think we've gone from there being more of, say, in the US, there's always been very clear compliance requirements when we come to like HIPAA, SOC 2, DFARS, when we get into the conversation around finance. The UK and Europe also has compliance requirements. However, one big thing which has come about is insurance companies wanting specific elements of cyber protection within policies. And it doesn't matter whether someone's had a breach or they haven't had a breach. They want very specific elements implemented, but at the same time, they can also be quite grey in the actual formatting of that. So for instance, we've had it before where insurance companies, especially around manufacturing industries recently in Europe, where they have requested a SIEM tool. They haven't specified the requirements of that SIEM tool. They haven't necessarily demonstrated precisely, even especially around cloud, where that needs to sit. On-prem, they're a little bit more familiar, but with cloud seems to be the Wild West to them. So that conversation with MSPs, especially over the last year, has become far broader because their clients are looking to them for advice. They're also looking to be protected. They're also looking to stay out of that box of having a huge premium. But insurance companies around 2 years ago also started doing something very interesting. Some of the very big guys did, where they started offering the SIEM and SOC themselves at quite a high premium as a element to be able to fulfill that requirement within their own policy. I think that was a wake up to a lot of MSPs, especially in the UK, where they were thinking, oh, well, if my client needs that from their insurance company, I can provide that probably at about a quarter of the cost. And I can also provide that as part of their IT, because one bit that's always forgotten is the need to have the access to that network in order to perform the security. So it makes sense for the MSPs to provide that element. But I would say with the MSPs that are doing a full stack of cyber, it's coming from insurance, it's coming from compliance. There is a small percentage, I'd say the 10%, that are building a business arm to be able to protect all clients to the same level from the outset before that question comes. But a lot of MSPs, I would say, are moving into it through their customers being asked a million different questions by insurance companies, compliance changing, all of that type of stuff, adding additional offices somewhere that no one even knew they were opening an office, and all of that type of thing. So I would still say that we're still at the moment being pushed by a separate industry. That can be seen as a good step in the sense that it means that it forces the hand, but at the same time, there is that other element of, it brings us back to that ethical element, that not that monetization, but making sure that it's performed correctly and by the right people. And it makes sense for it to be the MSP. And it does also demonstrate how when clients see their MSP as a trusted advisor and that they can come to them and have that conversation, which is a brilliant position to be in as well.
Yeah, I actually did some research into that earlier this year. And I believe the insurance companies call it real-time threat monitoring. And it's just sort of proof of compliance, and they either do it in-house or they work with MSSPs and MSPs to deliver it. So it's interesting because I feel like that one will drive change much more than compliance, because it comes down to money. You know, if you can prove you have this compliance, they're going to lower your bill, and that will make people actually act versus, you know, the vague threat of a government fine at some point.
Yeah. And especially government fines, I think, as well, where it can be slightly, when anything is confusing, it can not necessarily seem real, or sometimes it can come a long time to come about. It doesn't mean that it's not going to come about, but we've seen it happen a lot later than when, say, the issue happened. So that's immediate issue of insurance, and insurance impacts across the ecosystem of the MSP, in the sense that it's not just a case of it could be their insurance, which means that then they can't tender. We've also got then issues with an end client's insurance. There's back-to-back insurance. There's so much around there that it's already confusing, let alone adding in the possibility of an even heftier payment for something that you don't necessarily know what the premium's for, or whether you actually fall into the correct box as well.
So in your experience, what differentiates or what's the difference between an MSP that successfully grows a cybersecurity revenue stream from one that kind of stalls out in that go-to-market?
I will use the example. We've got a fantastic client. I won't use their name just in case they don't want me to talk about them today. But we have an absolutely fantastic client that has done extremely well with the cyber stack. And the reason that they've done so well with it is because they have built something which is understandable and has a tangible outcome. Now, that tangible outcome isn't even necessarily focused on preventing breaches, because really, if we build a cyber stack correctly from the ground up, breaches become something which is a far more distant conversation, because we're adding in that proactive element right from the ground up. So when we're looking at someone that's built a really good cybersecurity stack, they've standardized across the client base. That doesn't necessarily mean having to find solutions which fit all of the smaller clients plus co-managed. It doesn't mean that that has to be exactly the same, but having 2 or 3 tiers and standardizing on the tools across that persona for end clients within that tier, that's a huge checkbox within some people that really do well in this. The reason for that is because they are able to know what their profit margin is. They're able to know exactly what their purchase price is. They're also able to build teams around those tiers within that cyber stack. So they have engineers which are dedicated to that pod. They're able to standardize on the knowledge in those tool sets and also the knowledge of those clients. So that standardization is hugely important. Knowing that standardization as well also allows them to know their scope of work. It also means they're able to deliver to the client expectation. So the client knows right from the outset what they're going to be delivered. They also know the limitations. If they're within a particular tier, if they want to move up a tier, then they know the price point. But also the outcome is extremely important. So the reporting, the QBRs, a lot of MSPs that I see that stall, it's the reporting and the QBRs which become a problem, because we should be able to demonstrate to a C-level executive in a board meeting, cyber should be something which is on their awareness roadmap. We should be able to demonstrate a report which speaks to that business requirement, but also to be able to have open, transparent conversations in a quarterly business review with those end clients, but also charging for those QBRs, charging for additional reports to make sure within that package, it's a whole solution which that end client can see. Brilliant. I haven't had any issues, or the alerts which have been dealt with. This is how many there is. This is what stage they got to in a kill chain environment. But they ultimately understand that they can file those reports. They know exactly what's happening. They have an open and honest discussion. It also allows for the MSP to be able to know if there are requests, wish list items, growth agenda, all of that type of stuff. And so they are part of that board level team. So we're moving from, say, the VCIO to that VCISO type situation, but on a business discussion, not on a technical discussion. The MSPs that tend to stall a little bit more are the ones that are finding it hard to know how to discuss certain products with their clients. They're trying to fit too many products into a stack. They're trying to use products which look great on the tin, but you can't necessarily get the end client to understand that value, or they're not directly relatable to the end client. So they're the ones that tend to stall a little bit more, because that's when you have those types of shiny tool sets, if you tried to sell them to some clients might get it, others might not. Others might have a budget that means that they can just purchase and then see how it works out. But then you have your engineers not knowing which clients use which. Where do we sit with that? Okay, so if they're using a tool for policy for this client, okay, I can use that tool, but with this client, am I doing it manually? Is that something I still need to charge in my burden rates for? It becomes so confusing that you actually end up as the MSP paying for those tool sets yourself, and you end up losing money on your cyber stack. They're the ones that tend to be stalling, because it's that standardization, looking at this too technically in a way, and not looking at, okay, this is what my clients look like. This is the personas across the board. Where do I fit in? Where does this cyber stack need to resonate? And then they're the MSPs as well, those bigger, not even necessarily bigger MSPs, but those MSPs that are doing it well are the ones that then start winning new business on the front foot of cyber rather than IT, and tend to win IT contracts off of the back of cyber. That's where the differentiator currently is, because it is a good cyber stack, is a really good market differentiator in the MSP market at the moment, because everyone does IT fantastically well. So what is it that makes your MSP different? Cyber is something which end clients are going to be looking for. So they're going to be looking for the ones that have an understandable stack that resonates, fits a requirement. And that's where I would say that there's a big differentiator in that bucket at the moment. But it doesn't matter how big the MSP is, how small the MSP is, that doesn't equate to that issue, really.
Yeah, it's a very cleanly defined requirements. You know what you're paying for. There's no scope creep. You know, all that stuff eats away at people's margins once they keep saying yes to things, or things aren't cleanly defined. And it's great information for folks. Does marketing play a role in cybersecurity services? Like, do you see this driving it, and what tactics do you think work best?
Yeah, I think marketing's we're having currently a conversation about marketing in-house at the moment, because it's, I recently delivered a presentation on sales and marketing for MSPs, I'd say probably about 2 months ago. And there's a very big shift with marketing at the moment. And the irony of it is that AI aspect. AI coming into cybersecurity is proving new features that we didn't think would be available so soon, like in SOAR capability, all of that type of stuff. The irony with the marketing AI is that it's proving an unknown that no one knows how to tackle at the moment. And things such as search engine optimization, that's becoming something which people don't even know where to go with because it's slowing down at a rapid pace. So again, we never thought would be possible because people are going to ChatGPT. Other AI models are available. But the key thing here is that people are looking to AI for that conversation, which is pulling information from different feeds. And then we've got Reddit is still at the top of its game in a way that we didn't even think it still would be. So when we're talking about marketing with cyber, what we talk about is, and when I talk about sales, we look at leveraging AI in a human way, and that really helps MSP stand out from the crowd. And this is a process I'm very, very lucky to have an extremely clever marketing department. But when we then feed it into the sales discussion, AI with the human element really gives a different face to the conversation. And especially when we're talking about cyber, as I said, there are so many great things to talk about with cyber, so many things which can have a business impact on your end clients. But again, the key thing with cyber that I always say to any MSP that is looking to change their marketing strategy, their sales strategy, is go right back to the bare basics of what is your ICP and what is your persona. So when we talk about ICP, what are the verticals that you have worked well in, that you have case studies for, that you can demonstrate a true knowledge, again, with a tangible outcome for those customers, that you can use human faces to be able to tell your story and how great you are, and where you've really, really delivered well. What are those verticals? What are those companies like? What are the size of those companies? I would say vertical in this sense might be more important than necessarily size of company to begin with. And then we look at what is the persona of the decision maker that you work with? Who was the influencer? Who is the person who's going to write their signature on the piece of paper? Going right back to the bare basics of that, and then really focus and target on where you've done well before. Grow that, see what works well, use the AI algorithms for outreach, use things such as Clay, Zoom Info, all of that great type of stuff to be able to really target the list down into the people that you know you've got a proven track record within their vertical that they can see themselves in, and build that trust up from there, because the cyber message is about trust. You can say everything that you want to say in your statistics, your frameworks, all of that great stuff. At the end of the day, the client needs to see a trust value in you. And that's where I would always say to people, go right back to the beginning, because I can promise you, if you haven't looked at your ICP in the last quarter, it might have changed and it's probably different. And we need to move away from the scattergun approach of anything or anyone would be a great fit, because ultimately, if you don't have a great fit, you're not going to make the most margin. You're not going to have the best conversations. And you're also not going to have a little bit of lenience when it comes to also developing your own strategy, your own service to be able to fit with that client and to be able to learn and grow. Again, we've got a few really good MSPs and MSSPs that have done this so well by focusing on the vertical that they know, that trusts them, that's allowed them to then grow into the next vertical. And I would say that would be where I would really, really start. And I know it sounds like I'm telling people against Britishism probably how to suck eggs, but it's
that one I think is a Britishism. I haven't heard that.
I'm always very aware of it after I say it, so I'll have to put something up at the bottom of the screen, Britishism or subtitles. But just moving it more into, as I said, like sometimes taking it right back to the beginning is better than starting midway through. It's the same with any new book, really.
Yeah. Great advice too. I think technical teams really struggle with some of that. because they focus on features and technical capabilities, because to them, that's what they know and what's so impressive and what differentiates them. But again, on a business level, it's the outcomes that people are looking for. So that's where your messaging is probably best spent.
Yeah, definitely.
Hey, it's Nicole from the LimaCharlie marketing team. Many security teams deal with tool sprawl, dozens of different solutions that create gaps in visibility and slow down response times. Our SecOps Cloud platform consolidates your security stack into a unified platform where everything works together. LimaCharlie gives you comprehensive endpoint visibility and automated response capabilities in milliseconds instead of minutes, so you can stop threats before they spread across your environment. Try our scalable infrastructure for your security services for free at limacharlie.io.
In looking at your website, I can see Enhanced.io emphasizes integrations and partnerships, which caught my eye because LimaCharlie is very much about that. How does working across the whole cyber stack, not just your own products, change the way you partner and in what those relationships look like?
Sure. Again, I think that's a really, really good question. So when we I'd mentioned at the beginning when we started, the service we were offering originally, when we brought it to the MSP market, it was something very, very different. It was something which was in that next gen space. There were companies out there doing it, but they were very much a case of that they come from enterprise and distilled it down into the MSP space. We were taking it from startup and moving it straight into the MSP space with MSP focus. So we didn't have necessarily that track record of working with big enterprise companies with the big names at that point, but taking it back to that MSP market, what is important to MSPs, what is the MSP process? We did explore when we first started, and we were a standalone product at that point. We were a standalone service. It wasn't a case of that it kind of fitted into a stack because there wasn't a stack. People were at that point exploring EDR. What does EDR look like to them? What does that mean? How do they monetize on it? And obviously there's some brilliant companies out there that are absolutely fantastic in what they do in the EDR space. And that was where the conversation started around integration. It was at that moment when EDR became a foundation for cyber in a way. And one of the key things with that was, did we want to offer an EDR? That was a big conversation. So obviously, as I said, the SIEM that we offer, we work with Stellar Cyber, we're their partner for the channel. And XDR, it was a new term at that point, obviously being extended detection and response. And that term and that acronym, we love an acronym in the channel. As we all know, we love an acronym. That XDR piece at that point very much meant next gen, network detection and response, high impact, lot of information. It was like the old days of RMM, where you had the SaaS versions, and then you had the big on-prem and centrals, which I'd worked with historically as a partner in the past. And that was where then I actually had a click in the head when it came to the go-to-market strategy, because at our previous business, I'd worked a lot with Enable as a partner, which then branched out into a partnership with Datto, which then branched out into a partnership with Autotask, ConnectWise. And they were the lifeblood at the basis of actually what we did in the sense of that true partnership. The partnership we had with Enable was fundamental to how we supported MSPs, because we worked closely with their management team to deliver a service that benefited Enable's customers, but also then meant that we had a route to be able to have far more open discussions when it came to NOC, when it came to RMM audits and so forth. So that click in the head of thinking, this seam is very, very like what N-Central was back in the day, of being a very heavy duty RMM. And what Enable did really, really well is they made it accessible. And it was also something where a partnership enabled us to have broader discussions with MSPs of any size. So when we then had the discussion, do we offer an EDR? It was a case of, well, why would we offer an EDR? Why would we offer an MDR service when we could integrate and partner to be able to bring a MSP's existing ecosystem, existing security stack into the seam, which can integrate with anything? It's got APIs. It's got something where we've got very, very clever people in our team that even if we don't have an API, they can write scripts to the nth degree so that anything integrates. So being able to then integrate the existing stack, and it doesn't matter whether it's main brand EDR, it doesn't matter whether it's main brand MDR, they all integrate. That's fantastic. If we then have end clients that are, for instance, healthcare, that have got, we all know healthcare or manufacturing people that love a homegrown app, don't they? They love something that they made back in 2002 and they're very proud of it.
Changed.
Oh, no, it's brilliant. We all love it. But the fact that those things are so important to these end customers, which makes it important to the MSP, with cyber and our message, and the fact that you need to have whole network visibility, because if you don't have visibility of a certain portion of the network, then that's where a bad actor could get in and you wouldn't know. Mm-hmm. Then being able to focus on that whole stack in the sense of we can bring all of that information into one place, which also means that that XDR can do its job and it can show all of that data enrichment, and then we can have people make sense of that data and to be able to have a full visibility. I hate the term single pane of glass, but in a single pane of glass, in a single control center, that's something which is a really powerful message. But it also, you're taking something which is a very complicated tool set and actually making life easier for an MSP whilst giving them a high level of service. So going back to that partnership aspect and looking at the whole stack, I don't want to be competing with people that are at the best of what they do. Mm-hmm. I'm never going to compete with someone, a company, and there are many, many out there that I have huge respect for in the sense that that SaaS product that they've built, I'm never going to compete with that, and I don't want to compete with that. I want to make that MSP that's bought into, invested in that EDR, that MDR, and make their security stack to that next level, but also to enrich their original investment, but also to be able to have those true and honest conversations in partnership with these other vendors. And that is something which I think gives a truly powerful aspect of cybersecurity landscape, is when you're able to have relationships and partnerships with vendors that the MSPs probably see us as competitors, but I've got some fantastic relationships with other vendors that I wouldn't know some of the things that I do or be where I am today without them. So that integration is kind of a subset of that, where we are strengthening and building on an investment from an MSP, but also working with those vendors to be able to ensure that we're building upwards, not against each other. And again, it comes back to that ethical conversation as well, I think, in partnership. But I think that's where the whole stack conversation comes into it, because we are doing what we're saying we're doing on the tin of giving that whole network visibility. We're not just slotting into another piece of the stack where people are thinking, well, what is it you're looking at in comparison to what my EDR is looking at? And we can say we can see all of it, and we need your EDR to be able to do that. So that's been a really enriching experience to be able to do that with our MSPs, and for them to trust us enough also to know that we're not trying to rip out a tool that their team loves and also relies on. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's great advice. Yeah, I love it. Different tools, one mission, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So where do you see the biggest opportunities for MSPs and MSSPs to grow cybersecurity revenue over the next 2 to 3 years?
I think there's two aspects to that. I think that there is a huge opportunity when it comes to what used to be known as co-managed and enterprises. 5 years ago, we had the MSPs that specialised in that co-managed aspect. And there were only particular enterprises that were open to that type of co-managed aspect. And they were the enterprises who perhaps were located in one geography, and they had another big office in another area. They needed an MSP locally because their IT department was based in a different continent. All of that crazy, confusing stuff. And the MSPs that dealt with them were specialists in it, and they were fantastic at it. The key area that's become really interesting and it's become more and more clear, I would say, in the last 2 to 3 years, are those big companies that are now wanting to outsource their cyber, and they're wanting to outsource it to MSPs and MSSPs. More so than their IT. They're willing to hand more of the keys over. Previously with the IT, they would have it being viewed as a critical infrastructure. You can look after these critical servers, need that up and running 24/7. Now they're open to that conversation about whole network access, whole network support. So I think there is a huge benefit to the channel in that sense, because 5 years ago, those enterprises were purchasing big SIEM tools, wanting to manage it themselves, but they hadn't seen the complexity of the nature of their team needing to change, that cybersecurity was 24/7, and it's not just during business hours. And that means a huge uptick in burden rate for no ROI, particularly on that team when it's in-house at an enterprise. But also those SIEM tools need specialist skills. And it's not just the SIEM tool that you need skills in, it's also things like your networking. So we're moving from a level 3 engineer, say, up to a CCIE. We're moving into architect level, all of that type of stuff. And there's a huge skills gap out there. The IT had a skills gap. Cyber skills gap is fields apart from the IT one. So that conversation then meant that the SIEM tools at the enterprises were underutilized. They were noisy. They weren't necessarily protecting from breaches. There was a lot of issues happening there, and not in all enterprises, obviously, but that's a conversation which has been happening a lot more, which means that MSPs now have an opportunity with that, where enterprises are reaching out to them and they're looking for assistance, they're looking for guidance, they're looking for, again, I hate the term trusted advisor, but they're looking for that person to be able to speak to them on a business level as well as that technical level. And I think that's really, really interesting. And there's also other industries which are coming out of a enclosed space, such as building management. We're seeing a huge uptick in building management when it comes to, obviously, over here WeWork. There's a lot of different companies that are managing that building, but not necessarily the companies in it. But the conversation around IoT in those buildings, next generation tech buildings, is something which is brand new to everyone, but it's happening. And they are also, by adding more devices in and by adding new technology in, what does that look like from a cyber risk perspective? So there's new industries coming out which have a huge requirement that compliance might not have picked up on yet, insurance might not have picked up on fully, where there's a big opportunity. Because if these industries, as I said, I'll use building management as an example, if those industries are building these next gen technologies that we haven't seen before, then they are also going to have more awareness as to what it is that they need to do in order to protect themselves before the compliance comes. And that has been a huge growth market for some of our MSPs that are specializing a little bit more in that manufacturing IoT space. That's been something very, very interesting for them. And for our other MSPs, that co-managed aspect, and it's not just the big MSPs, we've got some medium to smaller MSPs. We have a 15-man MSP that supports a big enterprise in that co-managed space. And it's through that trusted relationship, that conversation, that they're able to support them. There hasn't been a restriction around the size of the MSP. So they're two areas that if the business is set up correctly and set up to succeed in that original cyber stack, and also in the element of knowledge, and also to be able to have an understanding of those verticals, as I said earlier, there's no reason for smaller to medium-sized MSPs to get those enterprise contracts, which then grow and grow and grow. So they would be the two areas that we're seeing huge growth platforms in for MSPs of any sizes across our portfolio at the moment.
Wow, it's a really great insight, and that's super interesting about the managed buildings too. We do a weekly sort of news report on this podcast, and we've recently covered a couple building hardware, like environmental control systems that have been hacked and stuff like that. So it's just wild how this space just continues to evolve and change over the years, right?
I'm speaking at a conference this week, which is Property Tech with one of our partners. And the stuff which I'm actually really, really excited to go, because the stuff that I'm seeing that some of these building companies, when it comes to technology, are not just creating, but have implemented, it is next generation. It is the type of thing that you thought you'd see on Starship Enterprise. And it's incredible. It's absolutely incredible. But it is, then we have to go back to sensible hats and say, but what does that do to risk? And what does that do to compliance? But it's really exciting to see that type of stuff. And also retail is the other one that is, obviously retail took a huge hit in COVID, but now they're developing other ways with technology in order to thrive, to differentiate, all of that type of stuff. But with that, obviously, comes a sensible hat of risk. What does that look like? Where does that? Because the majority of issues when we've had end clients come to us when it comes to breaches have been around CCTV systems or old systems in a manufacturing environment that a machine is reliant on. But CCTV IoT devices, I would say in the last year, have been 90% of the breach surface, which has been there amongst end clients that have come to us after the fact. And it's scary. It is scary, with excitement of the aspects of what we're going to see in offices and so forth. So it's always that excitement. Then we have to look at this very sensibly, and then we have to do the black and white checklist. But it is interesting. It's really interesting.
What advice would you give someone earlier in their career who wants to move into a leadership role like yours?
That is a brilliant question. That is a brilliant question. I think there's two things. There's always two things. That's me trying to keep away from, there's 10 things. I think there's two aspects. Being a young woman, I started in space, as I said, when I was 21. I hadn't even finished university yet, and I didn't know anything. I didn't know anything about this space, and I kept an open mind. And I think that I am from a male-dominated family. I'm from a military family, and my grandfather was very high up in the Royal Navy. And if there's one thing that the men in my family especially have distilled in me, is the fact that I can do anything just as well as the boys can. And the women in my family have demonstrated that. And I think that the key thing that any of them have passed on to me is you have to be open to learning at every stage, because as soon as you stop learning, that's when you start to fall down.
You're done.
And learning can be anywhere from fixing something very, very small, or learning about a aspect or something a colleague's working on. It might not even be within your role. I saw a post on LinkedIn the other day, which was very interesting, where it's people's opinions on that's not my job. And that is one thing that I always promised myself that I would never say within my job or within my role. I don't see it as a job anymore. It's very much a case of that through thinking that anything could be my job. Anything could be within my remit. I was able to learn from others. I was able to learn from level 3 engineers. I was able to learn from CISSPs. I was able to learn from anyone within the finance team, all of this type of stuff that you then learn. You're never necessarily going to be a specialist in it, but to have an appreciation for what that team does and to have an appreciation for how that also impacts your job. Because I promise you, as a salesperson or an engineer, finance will always impact your job. Anyone within a team, I can promise you, finance will always impact your job. And now being the CRO, I can see why finance always needed to impact people's roles, especially within the managerial team. So having that open mind to learning and to remove that is not my job from your vocabulary. You don't have to mean that you're going to swim into other people's lanes and take over, but appreciate what they're doing, appreciate the projects, appreciate what's happening. Because I have worked with people before that said, well, I'm not technical, so I'm going to step back. If I was on a call and I was with a technical manager and I've got my absolutely fantastic engineers on the call, are they going to answer the technical question? I really hope so, because no one wants to get information from me on how to configure a router. But I still wanted to know what was the process, because I want to be behind the process and support that process. The second piece to it is be part of something that is bigger than you. And what I mean by that doesn't necessarily need to be your company. I volunteered with GTIA, previously CompTIA, and GTIA is the association arm, which spun out last year. And I started with them when I was 21 through volunteering. I was elected to their executive council in the UK at 23, 24. And then I became vice chair at 25, 26. And then chair 2 years later. I was the youngest chair worldwide to date. I was their member of the year. I was their youngest member of the year today. And that's not me patting myself on the back. The reason that this is so important, I think, to young people out there to be able to see why this is important. I started in a room in the executive council. No one looked like me. No one sounded like me. They were all directors. They all had 20 plus years experience under their belt. They had achieved things that it was nowhere near where I was. And I sat in that room, and for the first 3 meetings, I barely spoke, which anyone probably guessed by the end of this podcast is not like me. I remember I learned, I sat and learned, and I saw how people were within the meeting. I was able to learn what they'd achieved and how they had. And I started to lose the vision of myself that I wasn't worthy. I started to lose the vision that I wasn't supposed to be there, or that I didn't deserve the seat in the room, that I shouldn't have been elected, because at the end of the day, I was elected, and I was elected to have a voice. Did that mean that I thought that I was better than anyone in there? No, it didn't. Do I still have days where I feel like, oh my God, there are people here that are so clever within what they do. That's always going to be the case, but that should always be the case. You should always be in a room with people that are better than you at different elements, because that is the only way that you learn. And GTIA has been the founding force for good in my career, because the people at GTIA pushed me forward. They showed me I could have a voice, but they also showed me how to use that voice, but also how to control that voice effectively to be at that same seat at the table. And a funny story which integrates with this: when I was small, My mum sent me to dancing, like dance lessons on a Saturday from the age of 2. I was horrendous. I was so terrible. I've got ADHD and no rhythm. I was absolutely horrendous at dancing. And my mum, bless her, knew that. She knew that. She was under no illusions that Hannah was going to be a ballerina. And every year, the dance school went to a festival, like a big competition, and each child was put into a category within the competition. I was so terrible, and they felt bad for me, that they put me into a competition, a part of the competition or a category where I was the only person, I was the only child in that category. I came fourth. And I was the only child in that category at the age of 6. And I had to have photos taken in front of 500 parents in front of an empty podium. Now, my mum said to me, "Did you try your best?" And I said, "Yes, I did." And she said, "Did you enjoy it?" And I said, "Yes." And she said, "Well, then that's absolutely fine." And she said, "And that's what matters." And do you know what? That is what matters. Have I tried my best? Did I keep trying? And if I then have the outcome, great. If I wasn't so good at it, that's absolutely fine. But that's when you need to know how to speak to other people respectfully and logically and objectively to then get to where you need to be. It didn't get me to a ballerina, and it didn't enable me to be at dance, but that story did teach me a great life lesson. It's okay not to be good at everything, and I will live and die by that rule.
That's great advice. Okay, so we're near the end here. The last question I have for you, it's the one I ask of everybody that comes onto the show. It can be as wide or as narrow as you want. Do you have any predictions for the future of cybersecurity?
That's a big question. Do you know what? I would, one question I've always, whenever I've done an interview and I've been asked, like, where do you see this in 5 years and so forth, or where do you see yourself in 5 years? I've always said I've never wanted to look further than a year. The reason for that is because if I look too far forward and put myself on a trajectory, it's harder to pivot. Now, does that mean that we don't need to be prepared? No, I do think that there's a lot to prepare for, and we've gone through a huge amount of meat in this podcast, which are things which do need to be prepared for. Cybersecurity, I think, is going to very soon be a even bigger part of people's daily lives than they even see it now. I think there's a lot of people that still see it as something which is only hits big businesses, hits governments, hits this, hits that. We saw in Spain not that long ago where everything came to a close for, I think it was around 30 minutes. It obviously might not have been a cyber attack. I don't think it was, but that is a reality of what can happen if a cyber attack hit a country. There's a very, very good series on Netflix, I think it's called 0 Day, which shows 1 minute when a cyber attack can stop everything in a country and the impact 1 minute can make. And I think people still see it as that Netflix series, that big TV storyline, the front of the newspapers, things that don't affect them directly in their everyday life. We see text scams, we see phone scams, all of that type of stuff, but it's not exactly, it doesn't spring to mind when it comes to the huge impacts that cyber issues can have. And I think that that's going to be something which drastically evolves, especially with AI coming into the picture. AI is a huge force for good when used correctly, but we do need to make sure we are leveraging it and using it correctly as an industry to be able to also counteract how it could be used for very, very bad things. And I think cyber is going to become more of an impact on people's daily lives, not just something which is secluded within our industry and secluded within those bigger organizations. Do I know when that's going to come or what's going to evolve it? No. Do I think necessarily that that's a bad thing? No, because I think we also need to be so completely open to pivoting at the moment, because we've pivoted so much, so quickly already. I think there's going to be another big pivot and another big pivot. And that's what's going to be very, very interesting over the next year, because it's speeding up. It's very, very much speeding up.
Yeah, the rate of change is accelerating, which is terrifying.
And it'll be nice to have a full night's sleep at some point. So whenever someone discovers an AI element to stop all cyber attacks, let me know, please.
For anybody listening that wants to get a hold of you or learn more about enhance.io, which I think they can probably find on the web, given the name, how should they do so?
Please feel free, I'm on LinkedIn under Hannah Lloyd. Please feel free to also reach out. I'm more than happy to share my email address, or as I said, send me a message on LinkedIn or send us a message on the website. I'm more than open to having a chat. I just want to say that our company does not have an ethos of hard selling. We are more than open to conversations, even if it's just for advice. That's very, very much our ethos, and that's my personal ethos as well. So if anyone just needs advice, mentorship, or just to be able to have a quick chat because you're as tired as everyone else is, then please do feel free to reach out.
All right. Hannah, it's been lovely getting to know you. Thank you for coming on the show today. I think it's a great conversation full of lots of good nuggets for our listeners. So really appreciate your time.
No, thank you, Christopher. And thank you to everyone listening. It's been really, really fun.
All right. Take care.
You too.
And that brings us to the end of another great conversation. You can support our show by sharing your favorite episode with a friend, subscribe, give us a rating, or leave a comment on your favorite podcast platform. If you want to be part of the conversation, you can join our community forum at community.limacharlie.io. Thanks for listening in, and we'll see you on the next one. The Cybersecurity Defenders Podcast is hosted and produced by Christopher Luft. The show is co-produced and edited by Sam Blake with graphics by Amr Al-Khatib. Sponsored by LimaCharlie, scalable infrastructure for your security services. Visit limacharlie.io to get started for free.